Hi, I'm Alexandra and welcome to my unqualified opinion of Stiletto, a new musical that not a single person asked for. This is not a review, it is not a critique, it's just me having seen a musical and wanting to chat about it. And in this case, it's kind of like we're friends at a coffee shop just catching up. It's going to be very informal. I haven't prepared anything. Like I said, I just want to chat about it. Do you like my mug? It says you're awesome. And it has a little dinosaur on it. For full transparency, I did not pay for my ticket. A friend of mine is a reviewer and she was gifted 2 press tickets and I was her +1. So I feel very lucky to have both seen the show and seen it under such circumstances. This show covers quite a couple of pretty heavy subjects. So if you are not able to listen to people talk about things like inappropriate contact with a minor or violence of any kind, specifically that resulting in death either by another person or by the person themselves, if you struggle to listen to things about racial inequality or sexual misconduct, then this is not the video or the show for you because they are very consistent themes. So this show is set in the 18th century in Italy and it's specifically surrounding the opera scene. Now within this time period, women were not allowed to be on stage. They were not allowed to perform in the operas and the theatre productions of that time. So they would have young boys take on those roles because their voices could go much higher and things like that. And to preserve their femininity, there was a horrible tradition, I don't know if that's the word, of basically mutilating these young boys to, like I said, preserve their femininity. So our main character, a young boy called Marco, is a castrato, which is one of these young boys who is mutilated in order that they can sing these female roles. He is accompanied by a man called Faustino, who is his tutor, his guardian, his lover, a man who is much older and has brought Marco to this specific place in Venice to meet a lady called Azzurra and her husband Pietro. Now, Azzurra and Pietro are really rich, like so stinking rich, and Azzurra has a real love of the opera, so she wants to be a patron to one of these young boys, essentially paying for everything that he would need and doing what's necessary to get him in the leading roles within the local opera houses. Her husband Pietro is essentially a scam artist. He's getting their friends, other people with lots of money, to pay way more money for things than they'd need to and is pocketing the extra. For example, in one of the scenes, he's selling the rights to a hospital or is trying to get funding for a hospital, and he's told them that the figure is way higher than it actually is so that he can pocket the difference. We also meet a young black girl named Joya who has this gorgeous voice, but because of the fact that she is both a woman and the descendant of slaves, she is prohibited from singing in the opera houses. Marco, who falls in love with Joya, decides that he's going to try and use his connections to help her out. Marco is very central to this plot. He has this whole complex relationship with Faustino, his tutor, guardian, lover situation, and Azzurra, who does become his patron, but also wants to become some kind of lover, and he genuinely does fall in love with Joya and they have quite a relationship. So there's a lot of emotional and mental politics going on, especially for Marco. He has very genuine relationships with each of these people for different reasons. Faustino gets very jealous by the fact that he's spending lots of time with Azzurra and with Joya. It's all very complex. Is that the word to use? Yes, there's a lot happening and there are lots of different threads that then sort of get tied up at the end. There is a murder that happens, it's accidental, but that reflects very badly on some of the characters and it all becomes very complicated from there. So now that there is some basic understanding of the context of this show. I've tried not to spoil the plot too much because if you go, I want you to genuinely be able to experience it. Now that that's sort of covered-ish, I want to talk about my thoughts because I really want to love this show, but there are some things that prevent me from thinking it's absolutely fantastic. In terms of the music, I loved the orchestrations. There are some gorgeous musical moments happening. However, I wish they'd leaned a bit more into the opera. There were 2, maybe 3 songs in which they did actually explore that as a musical genre through the voice. However, those were opera performances within the show. Within the other songs, it's more of a contemporary musical theatre feel. It's a lot more modern. And I'm trying to figure out why that is, whether that's in the writing of the music or whether that's in the way that the music was expressed. For example, there are some times where a song has been belted where I think you'd get a better effect if you give in to that operatic head voice. I think it would have lent itself really nicely and it would have helped the 2 worlds mesh even more. I also think it would have been fun to use more of the lower ranges for the men and only use those high notes sporadically, and then with the castratos of the boys, keep them in those falsetto-y spaces, have more of those operatic notes, so that you're just creating more a divide between the 2. I think they could have done a better job at establishing the historical context of the story much clearer and much earlier on. For me, who has no prior knowledge of the topic, it was only about halfway through, maybe just after, that I started actually understanding what was happening, not just following along the story. I think you need that historical context for this story to make sense, and I do think there would be a benefit of having the audience understanding that pretty much from the beginning. A lot more of the comedy bits landed for me than the bits that were supposed to be emotional. For example, there's one moment where there is a trial and the judge is played by the same character that previously died. So they're trying to have this big, intense moment. However, there will naturally be an aura of comedy because the person that's judging is also the person that's just been lying dead on the floor. And as an audience, that's very tonally confusing. I think my favourite performance came from the lady that played Utsura. Her name is Kelly Hampson. She brought such energy on stage every single time she was in a scene. Yeah, she was definitely my standout. I think she was the character that I connected most to, and I would put that down to the performance. There was also a character called Luigi. Now, he did not have a big part. It's very much a supporting role, but that actor, Sam Barrett, he was great. His solo, loved it. I felt so engaged when his character was on stage, and there was such an element of truth to it that was just really compelling. The costume and set, brilliant. You felt like you were transported to Venice in the 18th century. If you've ever been to the Charing Cross Theatre, it's a very, very small space, but it's used incredibly effectively. There's like this set piece in the middle right at the beginning, which is a well in the middle of a courtyard situation, and these pieces come apart to create other locations, and that again is really well done. They very clearly set each of the locations. There was a lot happening in the plot. They were trying to cover so many different stories and perspectives that I think Marco is supposed to be the central plot. However, it just ended up being more of an ensemble piece that kind of just started throwing threads everywhere, and then only at the end, when they started piecing together, did you understand why they introduced them in the first place. Because in the moment, some of them felt really random. For example, sometimes they had supporting characters sing a whole solo, and you get to know more about them that way, but I feel like it didn't quite commit either way. It didn't commit to telling everybody's story, but also didn't commit to telling one story. So you're in this kind of limbo where there's just a lot of information being thrown at you. I think I just simultaneously kind of liked that you got to know about all these characters, but it made it very difficult to understand who our central characters were. Also, sometimes there's really big jumps in emotion. It's one moment, it's very full of bravado, it's very behind a wall, and then the next moment it's full on yelling, and it doesn't feel like there's a bridge between the two. It feels very inauthentic. It feels like a jump and it feels a bit forced. I can't quite figure out whether that's in the writing or in the performance, but it was sometimes occasionally a little bit jarring. There were some really gorgeous moments of choreography that I think did add to the story. Like the one song in Act 1, there's this choreography with these knives, and it's just brilliant. It was really, really captivating. There were other times where I was like, I don't really know what this dance is adding. That's the end of that thought. Some scenes/songs are a little long. I honestly, potentially controversial opinion, would say that this would potentially work better if it was shorter and it didn't have an interval. Because there's this big moment, this big emotional moment right before you hit the interval, and I think it loses the momentum when you have that break in between. They come back where they left off, and I think that's just very difficult to do as an actor and to get the audience back in that headspace. So I think it would potentially actually benefit from not having an interval, running all the way through and being slightly shorter. I also want to shout out the woman, what is her name, who plays the Marco's double. She sings all the opera numbers. All the opera numbers is 2. But she has a stunning voice. Update, I couldn't find her name, but she was absolutely phenomenal. So huge shout out, because gorgeous moments, absolutely stunning. The weather is crazy. It's gone so dark so fast. It's just the time of year we're in, I guess. Anyway, those were my thoughts on Stiletto, a new musical. If you want to check it out, it will be at the Charing Cross Theatre until the 15th of June. Yes, just double checked. I do think it's worth a watch. If it's something you're interested in seeing, then I definitely go ahead and take a look. But equally, I hope that it develops more from where it is, because I think it could be really, really good. And at the moment, it doesn't blow my socks off, but I did have a good time. This has been some very random content for me, and I may do it again in the future, because I like seeing theatre and I like having things to say. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Okay, have a good evening, good day, good night, good morning, if anybody even watches this. Bye!